Question 4. Some students investigated how exercise affects heart rate. Figure 4 shows their results. What was student B's resting heart rate? Now, you can see here, resting obviously means just before they start exercise, so just before there's any increase in heart rate. They have a resting heart rate of 66. Each small square is equal to 2, if you'd have worked out the scale. So, in total, it's 66. The students started running at 2 minutes. What evidence is there for this in figure 4? So after 2 minutes, as I said earlier, you can see an increase in heart rate. There would be only a couple of other stimuli that would do that. One being a shock, perhaps, or another being an increase in temperature. Okay, back to question 3.3. Sorry, girls, this is in a bit of a funny order for this beginning bit. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to go back to it. So, yeast is used in the brewing and baking industries. Why is yeast used in these industries? For those of you that didn't get round to revising, anaerobic respiration in yeast, which is sometimes called fermentation. Okay, yeast is a single cell, so all the yeast will do in their respiration is take the glucose and break it down into carbon dioxide and ethanol. Okay, you'll notice there's no oxygen on this side, so it's anaerobic. Okay, and you've got to do a couple of things here. You've got to link how the products of this process are related to industry. So, first of all, I've picked up on the fact that it can produce carbon dioxide. The ticks mean there's a point available for that. This can make bread rise. So that's the carbon dioxide bubbling through the bread dough will make it rise. Or you could talk about carbon dioxide, which is useful, again, that's one mark, as it makes beer or cider fizzy, for another mark. Okay. The other obvious thing to pick up on is the fact that the yeast are able to produce ethanol, which, as you know, is an alcohol. This is what makes beers, wines, or spirits. You wouldn't necessarily call it a beer, a wine, or a spirit without that ethanol in it. So just have a quick look for those ticks, okay, because that's where those points are. And as I said, I'm sorry this is in a bit of a backward order for the first bit. Okay, so back to the question about exercise. You'll now ask the question, for how many minutes did the student run? If we have a look here, we're basically looking for how long it was that their heart rate kept going up. Okay, and indeed, how long did it take before it started coming back down again? And if you can see on there, the answer is 4. So they started at 2 minutes, and then they slowed down. Actually, that should be 2. The mark scheme was wrong there. Excuse me. Question 4.4. Student B is fitter than student A. Use figure 4 to give 2 pieces of evidence that support this statement. So, why are they fitter? So, looking at this graph again, we're talking about student A being less fit than student B. First of all, read the graph like a book, as I always say. Talk about this initial part first. So, the resting heart rate for student B is lower. So I've just put down, initially that resting heart rate was lower. Or you could talk about this idea that their heart rate did not increase as much. Okay? So we're talking about reasons why student B is fitter than student A. So there's two things in a graph, isn't there? There's how much does it increase? So we've said it does not increase as much. Fantastic. But also, if you're looking at graphs properly, you look at how fast they increase. Okay, so that's indicated, as you know, by the gradient on the graph. So the other thing you could have said is it did not increase as fast, i.e. the gradient was less, or it returned to normal sooner. So you just need 2 out of all of these 4 things. Okay. So, there are other changes in the body during exercise. Explain why these changes occur. Okay, so we've got 2 parts to this question. Okay, we've got to identify what those other changes are, or what those other factors are, as I've put here. Okay, and we've also got to explain why these changes occur. So at the bottom you'll see I've got this idea, reasons or explanations, whatever you want to call it. I've kind of split my answer into 2 because although it's not the biggest question, we've got to make sure that we hit both parts of the question. So for me, just initially to highlight to you, you don't have to write everything that I've written down. It's only 4 marks. So my advice to you would be to look for 2 factors, if it's a 2-part question, 2 factors and 2 reasons, okay? So where I've done the arrow up, that means there is an increase in. Please don't do this in the exam, but I was trying to squeeze a lot of information into a small space, okay? So things you could have picked up on, there's an increase in breathing rate, breathing generally becomes deeper, there's an increase in body temperature, you get more sweating, more muscle fatigue, or you get something called vasodilation, which, as you know, is your capillaries widening to let more blood flow through. Okay, now your explanations. In terms of these first 1, 2, breathing rate, deeper breathing, why do they do that? Well, we need more oxygen for more respiration. We've talked about this word more so many times. Really helpful when you're talking about exercise. So you get 1 mark for either of those, indicated by the tick. So if you'd have said that, and that, you'd got 4 marks. Okay. Other things you could have said, more CO2 removed. You could have said generally we need more energy because we need more muscle contraction. Can you see with exercise, I'm using this word all the time. You could have talked about, if you're talking about sweat, okay, so this is your increase in sweating because more heat's released from respiration, and sweat actually cools us down by evaporation. Okay, but you're going to have to look very carefully for those 4 marks. 2 different changes, 2 distinct reasons. Okay, so that would be 1. This would be 1 here. Okay, so maybe pause it now and have a look, see if you've got those 4 marks. If not, add some in. Okay, it should be in order now. Sorry about this. Question 5. When an organism grows, new cells are produced by cell division. What type of cell division happens to produce new body cells? Mitosis. Why can cancers grow very large? Cancers grow very large because that cell division is uncontrolled. So what that means is just more cells are made over and over and over again. Give 1 factor which increases the risk of getting cancer. Most of you will know this anyway. So the slashes indicate they're all different factors. If you have a query as to why yours wasn't allowed, please come and let me know, because it could just be that you have to specifically state carcinogen as opposed to chemicals, for example, and I can explain that to you. Okay. Survival rates for people with cancer have improved a lot. People who are alive 10 years after diagnosis are usually considered to be cured. Okay, let's not look at the graph until we know what the question is. 78% of people diagnosed with breast cancer in 2001 were alive 10 years later. Complete figure 5 to show this information. So 78% of people diagnosed with breast cancer were alive 10 years later. So if we look at that first bar, you'll notice there's a bar missing. We've just been asked really to fill in the gaps. So first of all, we have to understand the scale. So each of these small squares they're using as 10, as you can see. So 10, 20, 30, so on and so forth. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to look up here for 78. So if there are 5 small squares in 10, that means each little one is 2. So I go up to the one there, and I'm coming down. Okay, and I'll go up the top. Now you've just got to be really careful here that you don't automatically colour it in, because of course they're asking you to follow their kind of key, and they've got their key here. Okay, so we don't colour it in. So, which type of cancer diagnosed in 1961 had the highest survival rate? That was testicular cancer. We have a look on our thing here. All we have to do is to look for the one with the biggest bar, because there are more people surviving 10 years later. Which type of cancer shows the biggest improvement in the percentage of people alive after 10 years? So if we have a look back here, the percentage of people, that's relative to the ones that started off, because there weren't that many to start off with, we would assume that it is prostate cancer. Suggest 2 reasons why the survival rates for all cancers have increased. Now, these are the types of questions that throw people the most, really, because this could be anything really that is a sensible suggestion. So it's sensible to suggest that there's improved treatment or drugs. Yeah? And actually these are separate. So if you've got treatment and drugs, you get 2 marks there. Okay? You could talk about the idea that people are becoming diagnosed earlier because there's more screening, so therefore we're more likely to catch it and treat it. You could talk about the idea that patient knowledge is better, so people have a better idea of what the risk factors are. Or you could talk about patient diet. So girls, where I've put or, that means, you know, they're separate points, but there's just not enough room for me to put them in there for you. Okay. That was question 5, so we're now on to question 6. Okay. Pathogens cause infectious disease in animals and in plants. Draw one line from each disease to the type of pathogen that causes the disease. You really, really, really need to get some cue cards with these on. They need to be learnt, okay? So, gonorrhea is caused by bacteria. Malaria is caused by a protist. It's the only one that you need to learn, actually, that's caused by a protist. Measles is caused by a virus. Okay. Some parts of the human body have adaptations to reduce the entry of live pathogens. Okay, look at my ticks again. That's where the points are for this one. We're asked to explain how the trachea has adapted to reduce the entry of live pathogens. So the trachea has mucus to trap pathogens. The trachea has cilium